Imagine being trapped in a tower for 50 years, betrayed by your husband and father, all in the name of royal duty and political gains. Today on Royal Gossip Paints, we have the chaotic story of Joanna the Mad, whose tragedies still echo through the corridors of history. As we remember 469 years since her passing, we unravel the truths and myths surrounding her legacy. Stick around to discover how Joanna's struggles against the limits of her era shed light on modern views of mental health and women's rights. You won't believe how her story still resonates with today's society. Juana, born as the third child to the Catholic monarchs of Spain, found herself at the heart of her parents' grand diplomatic strategy, which was to weave a network of alliances across Europe. Her parents, Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon, were deeply religious, hence their nickname, the Catholic monarchs. However, their faith did not overshadow their political awareness, especially when it came to the strategic marriages of their children. This strategy primarily aimed to isolate France, which was then a dominant power in Europe. To understand Juana's role in this grand plan, it's essential to grasp the context of her time. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, much like Game of Thrones, royal marriages were not just personal unions, but significant political alliances that could determine the fate of nations. Thus, Juana was sent to Flanders, a region that now includes parts of modern-day Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, to marry Archduke Philip the Handsome. Well, handsome? He was not. But apparently this gentleman was considered a beauty at that time. The marriage between Juana and Philip was said to be one of genuine affection, at least initially, with reports suggesting that the couple experienced mutual love at first sight. This was somewhat unusual in an age where royal marriages were often arranged strictly for political convenience, and personal feelings were secondary. However, Juana's life in Flanders was not easy. She kept getting pregnant because, well, there was no Netflix at that time. People did what they did, and they made love. Yet the couple's relationship began to sour due to Philip's numerous cheatings. This behavior led Juana to bouts of jealousy and despair, starting to plant the seed that she was a bit crazy. Despite these personal challenges, the Spanish ambassadors in Flanders reported that Juana was a capable, intelligent woman with diplomatic and political smartness. This view is very different from the later image of her as mentally unstable. Tragically, Juana's siblings' deaths unexpectedly reshuffled the line of succession, making her the only heir to the Castile and Aragon throne. So Queen Isabella the Catholic sent her daughter a WhatsApp message from that time, a carrier pigeon or something like that, to inform her that she had to return to Spain immediately. Juana answered her mother's call and went to Spain with her husband, who was not very happy. Upon returning to Spain, the dynamics of power shifted. Philip was displeased with being merely a consort rather than a ruling king, a role he might have assumed had he stayed in Flanders. Nevertheless, 6 months later, he returned to Flanders, leaving Juana in Castile, pregnant and politically isolated. Juana insisted on joining her beloved husband, yet this was against the wishes of her mother, Queen Isabella, who saw the potential for political instability. Isabella, foreseeing political challenges, took drastic measures. She decided to confine Juana to the castle of La Mota to prevent her from rejoining Philip. On a cold winter night, Juana decides to go out into the castle courtyard at 2 in the morning, completely naked, and says, "Look at me. If you don't let me go with my husband, I'm going to catch a flu like you wouldn't believe. And since there's no Frenadol found at this time, you're going to be left as the heir." And then Isabella says to her, "Look, go and leave me alone." Before her death, Isabella, who had already seen some things in her daughter, had written in her will that if her daughter were not capable of ruling, her husband Ferdinand would act as regent king. Considering Juana's vulnerable position, can you guess what Ferdinand did next to secure his control over Castile? After Isabella's death, Philip and Ferdinand indeed made a pact to govern on Juana's behalf, arguing her incapacity to rule, a move that would have profound implications for Juana's legacy and the perception of her mental health. However, look at the whims of fate. Call it karma, call it justice, and call it whatever you want. But it turns out that the handsome died in strange circumstances. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the death of Philip the Handsome have fueled speculation and debate for centuries. Some believe he was poisoned by his father-in-law, Ferdinand the Catholic, while others suggest his demise was due to a disease contracted from his numerous extramarital affairs. Following Philip's death, Juana's behavior became a central narrative exploited by her father, Ferdinand. Her profound grief and strange actions during the funeral proceedings provided Ferdinand with the perfect pretext to seize power and confine her. thereby altering the course of Spanish royalty. Juana showed no interest in taking the throne of Castile. All she cared about was her husband's funeral. She insisted on accompanying her husband's funeral procession for several days while heavily pregnant with her sixth child. Her request to repeatedly verify Philip's body in the tomb, ensuring it had not been replaced by someone else as a morbid jest, and her acts of kissing the mummified remains of her husband were not just seen as signs of grief, but as evidence of her unsuitability to rule. These events led to her being tagged Juana the Mad, a label that has persisted for nearly 5 centuries. The depiction of Juana as mentally unstable facilitated Ferdinand's move to lock her away in the Tower of Tordesillas, under the guise of protecting the realm but essentially taking over her authority and rights as the queen. This confinement began a long and lonely period of her life, during which her mental and physical health got worse significantly. Tragically, Juana's son Charles, later known as Charles V, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, continued this legacy of sidelining his mother. At the death of his grandfather, the eldest son of Philip and Juana, Charles became the King of Castile and Aragon, and also the entire German Empire. Despite his vast power, he failed to restore his mom's rights, leaving Juana confined in the tower, visiting only occasionally. "Look, Mom, here you are. Very well." Reports from this period suggest that she exhibited signs of severe psychological distress, often refusing to eat, dress, or engage with others, not necessarily because of inherent madness, but as a reaction to being imprisoned and isolated for decades. Juana died on April 12, 1555, at the age of 76, having spent nearly 2/3 of her life confined in the Tower of Tordesillas. Her trauma illustrates the dangers of misunderstanding mental health and political manipulation. It forces us to reconsider how history remembers Juana. Was she truly mad, or was she a woman overwhelmed by grief and betrayal, reacting in ways that her contemporaries could not understand or accept? Juana's life story is not merely a tale of madness. Still, it may also be of untreated mental health issues like postpartum depression, aggravated by the profound betrayals of the men in her family. Considering these components, it becomes apparent that perhaps it is time to reassess how we label and remember historical figures like Juana. Reflecting on Juana's story through the lens of today's awareness of mental health and gender dynamics invites a critical re-evaluation of her historical painting. This discussion is about understanding how historical narratives are shaped by contemporary values and biases. In modern society where mental health awareness has progressed significantly, Joanna's experiences invite questions about the intersection of power, gender, and psychological well-being. This re-examination allows us to not only bring historical empathy to her story, but also to reflect on how such narratives might inform our current approaches to mental health and women's roles in leadership and society. Comment below to share your views on Juana's legacy and how history treats women and mental health. Let's keep the discussion going and bring more forgotten stories back into the light. Together we can challenge and change the dark narratives of the past to shape a brighter future.